Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session. We will be getting started shortly. We do have a lot of folks signed up for today's session, so we do want to make sure to give everyone enough time to log on and get connected so we can dive into today's session. I do want to thank you all for joining us today. I am Jasmine Garrett here with the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. Today's session is an informational overview on the Garden State CPACE Program. A quick housekeeping note, we do suspect that many questions will be answered in today's presentation. However, if you have any questions at any point during the presentation, please feel free to send your questions to gardenstatecpace@njeda.com. Today's session is being recorded and will be posted on our NJEDA and YouTube pages. The slides and other resources will also be available in the next few days. Now to get us started, I will shift things over to the New Jersey Economic Development Authority CEO, Tim Sullivan. Tim.
Great, thanks so much. I'll be really brief because I know there's a lot of interest in this program and we have a ton of people signed up. I think there's like 250 people or something like that are signed up for this, which makes me think people are maybe confused. This is like the next episode of Succession or something, that there's going to be some big reveal on this platform. This is very exciting. I'm not sure it's as exciting as Sunday Night HBO, but we'll do our best. The CPACE program is a really important priority for Governor Murphy, for our entire team. I will acknowledge and cop to the fact that we're a bit behind on the timeline we would have liked to have been on, but this is a really complex project, perhaps more complex than initially understood when the legislation was passed, and we are focused more importantly, it's more important to us to get it right than to get it done fast. And so we're being deliberate and thoughtful about making sure we get this right. The other thing I will say with great certainty, and we've done a number of these listening sessions and feedback sessions on rules and guidelines for a number of different programs over the last couple of years. I promise what we have now is not perfect and can only get improved and made better with feedback and input and the written comments that we'll be soliciting at the end of this session. So we're doing this process, which we do for all of our kind of rule writing and guideline promulgating, not only because it's required by law from an executive order of the Governor Murphy issue, but also because it's a smart way for us to, address any concerns, get good feedback, take market, commentary and feedback throughout this, because, we think the CPACE tool is a really important tool in the toolkit of clean energy and clean energy economic development, which is something we're really committed to broadly. We have a number of different initiatives and tools underway, but CPACE is one of the heavy hitters in our lineup. And we're really excited to be beginning rolling it forward. We have not rolled out everything we need to roll out. There are some appendices and some supporting documents that are still working their way through the process, but we wanted to get these guidelines out and both demonstrate that we're on it, that this is really important to us, and that we're making progress and we're getting a lot closer than perhaps people understood. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Max, who's going to take us through all the nitty gritty and the many wonderful details of this contemplated program. But again, we really appreciate the great turnout and the great interest in this program. It's important to us, it's important to the governor and the entire administration to get this done, get it right. And so we really appreciate everyone's time and interest. And with that, Max, take us away. Tell us all about New Jersey CPACE.
Sounds good, Tim. Thank you very much for that introduction. Let me just share my screen here. All right. Does it look good? Everyone can see it?
No, we cannot see it.
No. All right. Well, good thing I asked. Let me try that again. How about now?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you again, Tim, and good morning, everyone. And thank you again for taking the time to join our Garden State CPACE informational webinar. My name is Max Frank, and I'm a project officer on the clean energy team here at the EDA. I know everyone's been eagerly waiting for the EDA to release the Garden State CPACE documents, and I'm happy to say that as of yesterday, the guidelines have been released for you to review and comment on. So during this webinar, I will be giving a brief overview of the program, as well as elaborating a bit on where to find the guidelines on the CPACE website and how to submit any comments you may have. Beyond that, I'm also going to be providing an update on the various items that the EDA is still working on in preparation for the program's launch. So that said, let's get into it. So this is just an agenda. And again, thank you, Tim, for those great opening remarks. From here, we're going to move into a program overview, which we will cover eligible projects, general requirements, benefits, and program mechanics. Then we're going to move into participant responsibilities and specifically focusing on municipalities and capital providers. And then we'll cover public comment and how to go about submitting public comment. And then finally, I'm going to give some next steps on what's to come from the EDA, what we're working on, and a rough timeline. So this first slide provides an abbreviated overview of the program. And again, for a little more information on the program, definitely please feel free to check out the CPACE website and either watch the recording or review, or even watch the recording and review the slides of the webinar that took place this past October. But anyways, so authorized by statute in the summer of 2021, the Garden State Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy, or as we're calling it, CPACE program, will provide a new form of financing for renewable energy, energy efficiency, water conservation, and certain types of resiliency-related improvements for New Jersey. The program works by enabling eligible commercial, industrial, agricultural, and certain multifamily residential real property owners to access financing to undertake these kinds of improvements on their properties and ultimately repay the financing through the payment of an additional assessment to their municipality, similar to that as they would for a real property tax, sewer, or water bill. Now, the legislation directs the EDA to develop guidelines for the Garden State CPACE program and to also develop the standard forms of documentation to be used by the program participants. The statute also directs the EDA to implement and oversee the program, but the EDA will not have a lending role. I'd also like to direct your attention here for a second to this box at the bottom of the slide. And this has been a question that's been asked. So while we will include a detailed frequently asked question sheet as part of our program launch, I did want to address an important point regarding the existing Clean Energy Special Assessment Program that was established by statute in 2011. So in line with the 2021 statute that authorized the Garden State CPACE program, which is the topic of today's webinar, until EDA has published finalized documents for the Garden State CPACE program, all applications that have been submitted to the Department of Community Affairs relevant to the 2011 program will still be allowed to move forward. It's not until after EDA obtains board approval for the program and publishes on its website all of the statutorily mandated items required by the 2021 statute that the DCA will then stop accepting applications to that 2011 program. I also want to add that any application submitted prior to that date will still be processed by the DCA. So moving along here. Here, we're going to go over the types of projects that are eligible as part of the program. And again, this is a recap of the October webinar, but it's important to include here again. So first of all, to be considered an eligible project, a project must be affixed to an eligible property and must be for the acquisition, construction, installation, or modification of one or more of the following types of improvements. And again, definitely feel free to read through the definitions as I go down this list. But we have your more typical types of improvements like energy efficiency, renewable energy, EV charging infrastructure, energy storage and water conservation. And then we also have some resiliency improvements like flood and hurricane resistance improvements and stormwater management systems. And again, these slides will be posted to the Garden State CPACE program website, so you'll be able to download them and review them later on if you so choose to do so. Let's move on here. Here, we're going to work through some of the requirements of the program. So first, and again, feel free to read through this as I go over it. To be considered an eligible property, the property must be a parcel of real property and located within a participating municipality, which we'll cover a bit more on the next slide. To be considered an eligible owner, you'll have to be either the legal or beneficial owner of the property or duly authorized by the legal or beneficial owner. And you also can't be subject to any bankruptcy proceedings. Now, quickly, the eligible costs are defined by the statute as your direct costs, like your equipment and materials, your indirect costs, like your architecture and engineer fees, your program fees, which you'll find in Article 6 of the guidelines, and then you have your financing costs of the capital provider, like your closing costs. Now, regarding underwriting requirements, pursuant to the statute, The program will allow for terms of up to 30 years or the weighted average useful life, whichever is less. And that calculation will be found in Article 5 of the guidelines. The program will also allow loan amounts of up to 90% of the appraised value of the property after accounting for the proposed improvements. And also the financing may not exceed the total project costs as defined in the guidelines. And while you read through the guidelines, you will notice that we are not requiring a minimum savings to investment ratio. We wanted to make this program as desirable and accessible as possible. So that said, you'll see that for some projects, we still require that the ratio be calculated, but that ultimately won't affect a project's approval decision. Rather, it's really only included to help the property owner be more aware of costs and potential savings as they're involved with the project. So another point to note on this slide is that the EDA will not be involved in negotiating the terms of repayment. We're pretty much limiting that to negotiation between the owner and the qualified capital provider. And a final note on this slide is that these underwriting requirements, and this is important, these underwriting requirements are definitely subject to change with the launch of the new construction and refinancing expansion, which is statutory to come after the launch for retrofits, which is the topic of this webinar. Oops, sorry about that. Get back to where we were. All right. So very quickly, the Garden State CPACE program offers plenty of benefits for a variety of stakeholders in the industry. First, we have the property owners, and the property owner can get longer-term financing at lower interest rates, which enables smaller debt service payments to help projects that may not have previously worked out actually come to fruition. There's also no personal recourse for the property owners, and CPACE financing can typically be kept off the balance sheet. Next, for municipalities, it's important to recognize that this is a voluntary opt-in program that provides a way for municipalities to support measures that will ultimately reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other criteria pollutants. Also, in the case of the Garden State CPACE program, municipalities can help support resiliency measures, which can enhance the tax base because the improvements being done to the properties can increase property values and also boost local economic development. Moving on to mortgage holders. Mortgage holders must approve a CPACE loan. If there's a mortgage on the property, the loan must be approved by the mortgage holder prior to applying to the program. Now, a lot of the increasing level of comfort with mortgage holders in CPACE programs is that they see that the program enhances the value of their collateral, and the fact that these loans can't be accelerated makes the mortgage holder that much more comfortable, which is obviously important. Regarding contractors, the CPACE program helps close deals because it's often the financing that's the critical piece of getting a project done. And finally, for capital providers, what's important for them is that this program improves the security of the loan because the loan sits in a senior position and transfers with the sale of the property. Also, we're going to note that the Garden State CPACE program will be an open platform, and that will allow any capital provider that meets the basic requisites to participate in the program after applying. And that will be a separate application for the qualified capital provider. Now, as a quick overview of the mechanics of the program, let's just run through the circular flow that I put together. So first of all, it'll be the property owner's responsibility to approach all of the necessary parties and make sure that all required documents are completed and submitted along with the application. And of course, you'll read more about these in the guidelines, but specifically you'll want to check out Article 4, which will list all of the required materials that are to be submitted for the project application. And to name a few of these required documents, we're currently requiring a description of the proposed project and costs, a certification from the capital provider certifying that the capital provider is in fact independent from the property applicant's selected technical reviewer, amongst other things, design and engineering documents, mortgage holder consent, and the most current draft of any proposed financing agreement. And again, a list of this is all available in Article 4. And I want to add that the EDA will be releasing the legal documents shortly, like Tim said, but at this time, only the guidelines have been made public for comment. Moving along here, once the application's been submitted and the project has been approved by the EDA, The loan can then close and the capital provider can then disperse the capital to the property owner. The property owner can then use that capital to pay a contractor to install whatever improvements were designated in the application. And eventually, based on the repayment schedule agreed upon between the capital provider and the property owner can then begin to make regular payments to the municipality, and the municipality will then remit those payments back to the capital provider. Now we're going to cover some qualifications and responsibilities. And of course, all of the parties involved in the process are crucial to any given project. But here we're going to touch on, like I said, the qualification and responsibilities of municipalities. And the next slide, we're going to cover the same, but for capital providers. So, like I mentioned, municipalities will play a key role in the CPACE program, and a municipality must opt in before a project in the respective jurisdiction moves forward with any CPACE financing. A few requirements to qualify a municipality. First, in order to be a qualified participant, in order to be qualified to participate in the program, a municipality is required to adopt the opt-in ordinance, which will be provided later, enter into a program agreement, which will also be provided later, and that will be entered into with EDA, and then also notify EDA when both steps are complete. The opt-in ordinance and the program agreement are two of the uniform assessment documents. And again, all of these uniform assessment documents will be released later, but for the time being, only the guidelines have been released. But you will see a full list of those documents in a slide or two. And again, they are all listed in the guidelines. So after the municipality's completed steps 1 and 2 shown here, it officially becomes what we're calling a participating municipality in the program. And with this designation, the municipality has a few responsibilities, including entering into a CPACE assessment agreement for projects approved by EDA with eligible owners, entering into CPACE assignment agreements for projects approved by EDA with qualified capital providers, filing or causing to file these documents and notice of assessments with the county recording office, cooperating with any amendments to the assessment and assignment agreements and notice of assessments, levying, billing, and collecting payments for the CPACE assessment and remitting them back to the capital provider, and finally, enforcing the CPACE assessment as needed. And related to the earlier point on the similarity of CPACE assessments and property taxes, the enforcement processes mirror those used for unpaid property taxes as stated in the statute. And the final point I'd like to make on this slide is regarding local programs. So the statute also allows for certain municipalities and counties to establish their own local CPACE program, and the process for doing that can be found in Article 7 of the guidelines. Now, like I mentioned on the previous slide, another key participant here is the capital provider. So for a capital provider to participate in the program, they have to submit a qualified capital provider application that'll need to be approved by the EDA. And in order to be approved and obtain the designation of qualified capital provider, the capital provider must meet the statutory definition of a capital provider, as well as the other eligibility requirements that we've outlined in Article 3 of the guidelines. And these eligibility requirements include, for example, having a valid tax clearance certificate and not being in default with any pre-existing agreement with the EDA. Once approved, the main responsibilities for the qualified capital provider include ensuring that the CPACE projects and direct financing for the projects they are involved in are eligible, given the financing requirements discussed previously, collecting and remitting the closing fee from the project applicants to the EDA, providing the EDA with annual reporting related to the performance of direct financings, submitting a project application for any project changes, and continuing to satisfy all of the program eligibility requirements for capital providers throughout the duration of their participation in the program. Sorry about that. And again, these slides will be posted on the website. Now, we're excited that as of yesterday, and I mentioned this earlier, the program guidelines are available for public comment on the Garden State CPACE program website, which can be accessed using the link here. But it's njeda.com/CPACE/. And on the next slide, I'm going to briefly walk through just where you can find those on the website, and I'll have a big circle to show you guys just to clear up any confusion. But I do want to add that regarding organization of the guidelines, you can see that the document is organized into 12 articles, which are all shown here on the left. Articles 1 through 11 are the programmatic requirements, and specifically Article 12 here contains appendices A through I, which have not been released yet, and those represent the legal and uniform assessment documents that will ultimately be published for comment later once we get approval on them, and they will be released as part of the program launch with the guidelines. And again, we are now welcoming submission of public comments on the guidelines, and these comments should be submitted by emailing the NJEDA Garden State CPACE Program email address, which is gardenstatecpace@njeda.gov. And I want to take a second to rewind, and I want to make note that the agreements and other legal documents, again, have not been posted for comment, but we do anticipate making those available shortly. So as mentioned on the previous slide here, the guidelines and eventually the supplemental uniform assessment documents, once they're posted, will be able to be viewed on the Garden State CPACE Program website, which again is linked here. And to access the guidelines, you should simply navigate to the draft document section on the website. And then you can see that big red circle there, and you simply click that highlighted here link, and that will download a PDF file of the guidelines for you to save and review later on. That way you have it later on as well when you're reviewing the guidelines side by side with the agreements that are to come. Now, the purpose of this slide is really to just provide an update on where we stand with launching the program, and it shares many similarities with the table that was published in the October webinar that is also linked on the website. So, as I've mentioned previously, the guidelines which establish the terms and conditions that govern all participants of the program are now available to be commented on. And the outreach and the stakeholdering that we've been engaging in throughout the process of developing the program documents have continued in recent months and will continue in the coming months, because we encourage all stakeholders to participate in the public comment process, whether that's now or later with the new construction and refinancing expansion that you'll see on the next slide is listed as phase 2. So that said, once we've received public comments, we'll be making edits to the guidelines accordingly. And after we've made those edits, the updated guidelines will undergo a final review by the Attorney General's office before they're ultimately presented to the EDA board in conjunction with all other pertinent documents for the initial program launch. And those pertinent documents will be the different applications for the different parties, the legal documents, and obviously the guidelines. And speaking of the uniform assessment documents or the legal documents, they will be part of the initial program launch, like I said, and they will include all the different legal agreements required by the statute and listed in the program guidelines. Now, these documents are currently under review by the Attorney General's office again, but we will make them available for comment shortly as soon as we can. And I do want to also take a moment to highlight that the initial program launch will only cover retrofit CPACE financings. Following the launch of the program for retrofits, EDA will release supplemental guidelines that outline the requirements for new construction and refinancing projects. But again, until then, only retrofits are able to apply. Similar to how EDA drafted the guidelines for retrofits, however, the authority is also conducting benchmarking to leverage best practices from other CPACE programs around the nation and existing New Jersey clean energy programs as part of our process for drafting these supplemental guidelines, which will also be made available for public comment after preliminary drafts have been completed and reviewed by the Attorney General's office. And again, one more time, I do want to draw your attention to the bottom of the screen just to reiterate what I mentioned earlier, that the current Clean Energy Special Assessment Program, which is administered by the DCA, will stop accepting applications after the date that EDA obtains its board approval and publishes on its website all of the statutorily mandated items required to be published pursuant to the 2021 CPACE Enabling Act. And again, applications that are submitted prior to that date will still be processed, just to clear up any confusion around that. And that said, I know it was relatively short, but I know you guys are going to be busy reading the guidelines. So I want to say thank you everyone again for taking the time out of your day to attend this webinar. We can spend hours and hours going through all the nitty-gritty details of the guidelines, but I think it's best to just review them on your own, and we can discuss them probably in a future webinar post approval. So as a reminder, we are now accepting submissions, and all submissions should be emailed to Garden State CPACE at njeda.gov with the subject line as CPACE public comment, as you can see here, just so we don't get confused in our inbox, because I'm sure we'll be getting some questions in addition to comments. Ooh, sorry about that, guys. And another final reminder here is that we will also be reviewing additional written comments on the new construction and refinancing expansion. So please also feel free to address that in a separate submission to the same email, but with the subject as CPACE public comment - new construction, which again, you can see here. We want to make sure that we separate them so there's no confusion and we don't accidentally, although we wouldn't, but incorporate information for one part into the other part. But that said, I do want to say thank you